by their own genius.
Yeah.
Talk about that and that aspect of his character.
Well, I think I was referring to the poster, you know, which is this, which you see this picture of someone just experimenting or using their soul, their everything, their full intellectual, physical being to create a work of art. That it's so illuminating and so fantastic. But the film, if it's anything, is a journey to try and understand how somebody could do that, what it is to be able to do that, and the fact that this character could do that, but he's such a mass of contradictions and such a mixture between the bestial and the poetic that, you know, if you were going to separate the two, you could easily say, if you put the guy over there, and it was a film about a guy who delivered carrots by day and picked up shit by night, you'd say, yeah, that's the guy I'd cast. And then you look at these paintings and separate, you say, now who would I cast to play somebody who could paint? Now I know, somebody very tall and handsome and beautiful with no trouble with women hanging off it. But no, the reality is that the guy who looks and behaves like the guy who delivers the carrots and picks up the shit at night is also the guy that paints the brilliant pictures, you know. That's that, and of course all that came out of us having to use all the time and ability we had to delve into finding out from material, written witness, eyewitness versions of various things that happened to pictures of him, biographies about him, looking at his work, looking at work that influenced him, looking at his time, the peccadillos, the mores of the time, the political, what was going, geopolitics of the time, everything we had to really try and dig deep into a world because we were going to have to try and recreate it, you know.
And speaking of that, whenever, and I can't wait to get into talking about the process of you taking on this role, but before that, I've always wanted to ask actors who work on period pieces. When I see these period films, I feel sometimes quite envious of the lifestyle that these people lived in, the world they lived in. Acting in a film like this and being on those sets, which are just amazing. Do you ever feel that as well? Like this, maybe I could be more comfortable in this time period.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they're always, because there's a certain displacement about that, because it's in a sense, it's equivalent of the desire to have a simple solution to a big problem. It's like saying it was better then. But in reality, I tell you what, I wouldn't want to go back to the 1800s in any country in the world, not without a suitcase full of antibiotics.
Right.
And certainly a lot of hand wipes because they were flipping filthy. You know, there was no such thing as dry cleaning either, or deodorant. So I think, you know, it is a privilege to try and recreate a period. And of course what we did find out, as all the things I've just mentioned, that, you know, these people, that people have always been the same, they've always been human. The world was different. In a sense, simpler because it was pre-media. It was electrical and computer age. So I think people were allowed to explore their own genius with less clutter, I think, you know, and because it is so easy to be inadvertently derivative now, because it's all been done before.
It gets harder and harder.
I think so.
Yeah.
And even if it's by accident, that you do something original, someone will always come up, well, actually, it's been done before, because of the breadth of knowledge about everything. But things do happen in tandem, as we know. You know, I mean, people completely unconnected work on something on one continent and something on another. You know, the arms race and the race to space was a classic example of it. I mean, unfortunately, that was driven by the desire to destroy the human race if things went wrong. Right. But there you go, often from negatives, positives arrive, you know. And in a sense, that's very much what Turner was about, you know. This man, this contradictory, implosive, emotionally complicated man, everything that was difficult in his life fed into this interior, this nuclear fissure inside him, that even to the point that the way he communicated was implosive. You know, what we were discovering was somebody who could feel and understand with immense passion and immense poetry, but he never expressed himself as a human being about how much he knew, because what he was doing was pushing everything into this powerhouse, this pressure cooker, this nuclear fissure inside him that eventually he used as an instrument to go down the end of his arm here, via his heart, via his up here, the paintbrush, and whack out the end of it. That's when you find out what he's thinking, because he never talked about what he felt, he never explained himself, and he never explained his work.
He's an enigmatic figure, of course,
yeah.
But you got to know him quite intimately through research and your approach to the role. What, in your opinion, what was Turner's greatest fear?
What was Turner's greatest fear? I think one, that fundamentally, in the end, and he wasn't relying on the people he was living with, that they wouldn't understand what he was about. Because it revealed itself through the research and through the way we created him, driven by the amount of research that we were learning as we were creating this human being the way that Mike Leigh always does. You work with, you start by using people that you've encountered in your life as a template for a human being, then you build him up from ground zero to birth and try and invent everything you possibly can about what happens to him, to the point where you're going to see him interrelating with other people. In the process, if you've got family members, other actors, then you work on that organically. But obviously when you're working on a historical character, you're using and discovering new information all the time, because there's so much stuff to find out about, not only him, about what he looked like, about what he reportage on various anecdotes about his life, but also you're looking at the time, his influences, his preoccupations, and luckily for us, the early Victorians and the late Victorians, it's all pre-psychology, so they never really told you much about what they were feeling, A, or B, what they were doing in between the sheets. You know, so so we were that allowed us an arena for dramatic license. So what we had to do then in that case was, while we were building this character organically, we were divining within the little hints inside these biographies, inside these written eyewitness accounts, things that pointed to what he might be feeling, what might be his makeup, what was the kernel of his soul about. Don't forget also, we had the paintings. So in a sense, we were starting from what he left, and we had to suck that right back to how it started. And I think there's quite a lot, purely in what you see, that during the process of trying to make the man, there was a time where it felt odd, because we were thinking, like I said earlier, how could that have produced that? But the more we delved in, and the more we refused to acknowledge the contradictions as an impediment, as a liberating factor, the more we realized that we were working on an enigmatic, contradictory, incongruous genius. And it was never anything other than hard to pursue that route. But we went for it, and that's where we kept going, because we weren't inventing it. In a sense, what we were discovering was forcing us to do it. And because we were growing this character based on real human beings that might have had parallels with the person that was revealing ourselves, we then had to grow this human being cult, this organic thing we were creating, like a human hand. And if you take the image of the research being a glove, then we had to get this human being, this hand, into this glove, shove it together, mash it up, and make it one thing, indivisible from one from the other. And there's always a point when you work with Mike Leigh. Sometimes it comes late and it's rather scary, but it usually comes where the character, having done that process, starts to dictate to you, and it starts telling you, if you're pushing the envelope in the wrong direction, it says, no, I'm not like that. It's interesting. You've created it, but it becomes like a Frankensteinian exercise, because you've cooked this thing up with this combination of real reportage and invented proto-human being that becomes this thing, and it starts answering back.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And when you're tasked with this endeavor, where you're really letting this person's life, this real person's life, sink into your bones, and you're embodying this person, is there ever a point where it takes over to a point where it's frightening?
Well, I usually say no. Because when you work with Mike Leigh, because he's invented this formula, he's very, very precise about making sure when you're in character and when you're out of character. So when you go into character, it's with his instruction, and you stay in character till he comes out, until he asks you to come out of character. That's not all day, that's not for the, it's usually the duration of the improvisation you're doing, to the point where he's seen enough. Then he debriefs you on the improvisation, and then you do it again, or you start investigating another part of his life through improvisation with the other actors. So there's a very distinct ring-fenced character which is separate from you. Obviously you're the raw material, you're the salve that is trying to create this character. But on this, because he was such a contradictory man, and therefore by dint of that someone difficult to pin down, he was sometimes very elusive, and it was difficult to get a consistency, and an inconsistency is an oxymoronic conundrum. All right. Okay, so given that task, it was hardly surprising that I found myself one Sunday, early Sunday afternoon, wandering locally around where I live, which is not far from where Turner lives, but that's just purely coincidental. Certainly not far from where he's buried, in the crypt of St Paul's Cathedral, but I did make a couple of trips down there, and I begged him for forgiveness a few times. But and I went into this pub, and I was thinking, it was just an empty pub, a barmaid. And I said, "Are you a purveyor of wine?" Oh God, I thought, this is not right. And the woman sort of, what the hell is he talking about, you know? And I thought, this is bad. I went out and I just leaned against the wall. No, you're going mad. You're going mad, Spall. Pull yourself together. I went back in. I said, "Oh, sorry about that. Could you possibly have a glass of Pinot Grigio, please?" I mean, like all of a sudden, it was like he just came out a bit like a poltergeist that manifested itself, you know. And it was scary, but it was a good lesson, because got him back in the box, you know, and made sure that he stayed in there. Because the box has got to be in there, and you open the lid and you get in that box. If that starts coming out, this way madness lies, you know. So, but in a sense, I tell that story because it's very rare. Because, as I say, Mike Leigh, being the maestro and being the controller of this chemistry set that he asks you to be a massive collaborator with, makes it very distinct difference between what you are and what the character is. Now, it's your job, as I say, to use all the powers you have to create that character, but you build that character for it to be itself. And there's a massive difference between you and it. That doesn't, to me, to say that when he has to do things and did do various things in the film, I found them personally quite upsetting, but at times. And again, there's always that odd mixture of emotions when you're trying to embody a character rather than play a character. Do you know what I mean? It's because Mike's technique gives you the time to get right inside a character. There's always going to be a closeness between your emotion and its emotion, whether you're using your emotions to delve into theirs. The only way to play true emotion is to actually use what you have, because you're the paint, you know, you're whatever you want to say, whatever. I don't want to be make a highfalutin over, you know, sophisticated metaphor about what you are, but you are the raw material, so there's nothing else to use. You know, that's the thing about acting, is that you are, for good or bad, or whether you look, whether you're handsome, ugly, fat, thin, or attractive, unprepossessing, or whether you stink or whether you're clean, you are the person that you're using, and that's it. But, as I say, with Mike Leigh, you are the instrument, the character is your goal.
And what I was so impressed with Mr. Leigh about was, like you mentioned, the oxymoronic nature of the film, which is a perfect way to put it, because you have this, like you said, this bestial person with these images, these sets that look as good as his paintings. Painterly landscapes.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's congruous and incongruous at once. How does he, from your perspective, how does he accomplish that? It's incredible.
How does Mike get you to get those results?
Yeah.
How did he get those results? Well, I think it is to do with having the bravery to pursue what is revealing itself, and what it's making you create. You know, because what we're talking about, as I said before, the empty spaces that are in the material that you're discovering are the crucial things that we are obsessed with in this modern day, which is what makes a person tick. What are their psychological good and bad points? What is their motivation? What has made them what they are? This is a relatively modern obsession that we have. It's all post-Freudian, you know, it's all post-psychoanalysis. I mean, Turner was a man that did the same, but he did it through, in a sense, the lack of understanding about the human psyche was a benefit to him. In a very cruel way, one of the circumstances of his life was that his mother, who in a sense is one of the main characters in this film, although she's not in it, the poor wretch was would have been diagnosed now as a seriously violent, paranoid schizophrenic, because she was, for want of a better word, to use the turn of the time, a raving lunatic. Now, that was a terrible, to just go back to your question, what was he most afraid of? The one, that he wouldn't be understood in the course of time. The other one was that I think there was possibly a fear in him that he may have in him what his mother was suffering from, which was the terrible misfortune of being insane. And maybe he did have that in him, and maybe that's why he was so brilliant anyway. And maybe it's his ability to express it through his genius stopped him from having that. So that's a possibility, and that was something that I thought about. And the fact that various things happened in his life because of his mother's insanity, which is a massive negative in his life, it also created in his father this desire to compensate for his lack of motherly love that he was getting. So his father gave him more love. And you don't often get a chance to investigate in a film a story of such father and son love. You know, that's quite rare. And I think Paul Jessen, who plays Daddy, is a brilliant performance. But that's a product of the negative element of his mother being insane. Another negative element, that he had a sister, and when she died at the age of 4, and when he was 8, this made his mother worse. So he was taken away. But he was taken away to a place, to relations of his mother, where he met a person who understood that he had this embryonic genius. She herself was an artist. She was a teacher, a religious teacher, and a person that believed in equality in education, which she was very advanced for her time. This is in the 18th century. She also happened to be, her father happened to be a close personal friend of Thomas Gainsborough, one of the great landscape painters of his day. She also, again, misfortune, had 2 children that had tuberculosis, then called scrofula. And the go-to place at that time was Margate. So the first time Turner encountered Margate, as comes out in the film, he says, I lost 2 children here when I was, 2 friends when I was young. Also, it's quite close to London, it's a seaside. It's only 80 miles from London, but because of its geographical placing, which is an outcrop that sticks out of the corner of the bottom of it, England, where the Thames comes out, the Isle of Thanet, it's not an island anymore because it's part of the mainland, sticks out half in the North Sea and half in the English Channel, and it has a River Thames here and a large river called the Medway here. So it gets this incredible reflected light. So sunrises and sunsets are unbelievably beautiful. I see. Because you get the reflection from the light in the water and the water back, so you get this refrangibility. So at the age of 12, with these sickly friends, again a negative, like what the makeup of his soul is, it's negative, breeding this positive all the time. He had this image of this light burnt into him, and in tandem with the fact that there was this woman saying, you're a very talented artist. You know, so it was what we were discovering in a sense, in only the way that Mike Leigh can do this, the way he facilitates you to make these unusual discoveries about the negative as well as the positive in someone's life. I mean, that's what his genius is, and he asks you to go on with him on this journey to try and discover these odd consequences and these odd things. And you know, the more we found out that this, you know, this bestial man, this human, almost ape-like man at times, was harbouring this incredible mixture, this incredible turmoil in his soul that fed this nuclear fissure in him. that built up and up and up, and over the years, it got stronger and stronger and stronger until it eventually erupted into this freestyle, this revolutionary style that nobody had ever seen before, and people didn't understand. And right at the point, again, where he was offered the equivalent of $200 million for his work, he turned it down because, no, he was going with this thing in him that was a compulsion. And I think, you know, it was, as far as our discovery was this thing that was the amalgamation of all these elements that we were discovering from the hints we were getting and the facts we were getting from the actual extant material, which allowed us the cheek, for want of a better word, or the freedom to try and create a character to delve into understanding inside of it. You know?
Wow, this is great. Yes, I'm right here. There's been a lot made of your physical and vocal performance in the film. I think the most astonishing moment for me is when you weep. It's so raw. I wonder the things you do with your voice, how calculated those sounds are, or or if you just let yourself go.
Well, it's a mixture of both. I'll just cover the product up. The way that Turner expressed himself vocally and the way he was physically, we went out of our way to create this character from looking at the drawings as well as reading how people would seen him, you know. So as I said before, we used these human beings that had similar traits to try and get this fleshed out. So it wasn't trying to copy a drawing, it was taking that drawing to think of a human being that might have had those elements, and then but making that human join another human, blah, 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 till you create this character, becomes itself. So the voice grew out of that. This deep voice grew out from the fact that in the research as well, there was strong evidence suggested he did have a deep voice. He also had a very strong Cockney accent, which is a term for a working class London accent, which he didn't change. Also, there's lots of evidence to suggest when he gave his perspective lectures, as in the film, no one could understand what he was saying because he had a deep guttural voice, and also he was difficult to understand because of his accent and because of the way he, it was mumbling. You know, I mean, he was. There is evidence to suggest he was like that. I mean, now there's that, but the crying, and the one moment he breaks down, apart from when he's dying, doesn't really break down. He just goes. He dies. Is the only time in the film where he ever really expresses the inner agony. Now that's obviously exacerbated, increased to an unbearable degree by the loss of his father. And like true profound loss in anybody's life, particularly when you find out that you've taken somebody for granted to a certain degree, which I think Turner did with his father, because his father allowed him to do that. I think the unbearable pain of that, also that and the suffering that his father went through with his mother, and also suffering in general. For instance, the film suggests and evidence suggests that he did visit prostitutes. Ruskin, when he was going through all of his work, discovered all these explicit but very beautiful pornographic paintings that evidently, allegedly, Ruskin burnt most of because didn't want Turner to be left with this reputation as being morally unsound, you know. But I think what we were also discovering in there was, you know, Mike Leigh is a master of detail and how important something inconsequential is because of the subtext under it. And I think what lifts that lid that is riveted down inside him, we've got this tiny little thin pipe that comes out of Turner's soul up his arm that creates the painting. Because of this unbearable grief in his life, all of a sudden, one tiny little look of vulnerability in this prostitute's eye, and one tiny little piece of humanity when she says her age. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like a speck of dust causes an earthquake, you know. It's like, it's a tiny little human, inconsequential moment that just blows the lid off the top of this nuclear fissure that is his soul. And all of that feeling about his father, his mother, his pain about his mother, his loss of his father, his understanding of the world, the thing that he is that controls him, which is the steam that's grown by this nuclear power station inside him. Bang, there's a meltdown. It comes out in one great big unbearable howling beast-like moment, like a beast that's been speared. I mean, luckily for him, and we did it, and Mike kept the camera running, he was able to, you know, almost like play it backwards and catch it out of you to get it back on again.